Millionaire marries a poor woman for a laugh, but her wedding gift breaks him in front of everyone. The dress was simple, the chapel filled with hidden laughter, and she walked alone down the aisle. She smiled, not out of joy, but because she had promised never to break a vow made long ago. No one knew. But in her worn-out purse, she carried something that would shatter the man who tried to humiliate her. And with one silent gesture, the millionaire realized he had lost everything that truly mattered. The chandelier cast golden light across Julian Rhodes's bored expression as he lounged in the VIP section of the Bellagio. At 34, he'd inherited his father's hotel empire and the emptiness that came with it. His friends, a collection of trust fund heirs and hedge fund managers, were downing champagne and laughing at increasingly cruel dares. 200 grand if you marry someone tonight, slurred Marcus, Julian's Harvard roommate, now running his father's investment firm. Not anyone, someone worthless. The table erupted in laughter. Julian's eyes narrowed. Define worthless. Someone who'd never be in your tax bracket, someone desperate enough to say yes to anything. Julian felt a familiar hollowness spread through his chest. These games had long since stopped filling it. "Double it," he countered, "and I'll marry someone within 24 hours, someone who has nothing." Phones came out recording. Laughter echoed. Hands shook on bets. They stumbled outside into the neon glow of the Vegas Strip, eventually finding themselves at a dingy roadside diner. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed harshly above worn booths. That's when Julian saw her. Amelia Grace moved with quiet dignity despite her faded uniform. Her hands were steady as she poured coffee, her eyes downcast, but somehow not defeated. Her name tag was pinned to a uniform that had seen better days, but was meticulously clean. Her, Julian nodded toward Amelia. She's the one. God, she's perfect, Marcus whispered. Probably dreams of winning big at the slots. You'll be doing her a favor. Julian approached her with practiced charm, ordered coffee, then asked her name. Within minutes, he'd spun a story about fate and connection. His friends recorded discreetly as he got down on one knee. "Marry me," he said simply. "Tonight, I have a feeling about us." Amelia's expression changed almost imperceptibly. She looked at Julian with eyes that seemed to see through him, past his designer suit to something beneath. Then, instead of the excitement or confusion he expected, her face settled into a strange calm, like someone recognizing an unavoidable duty. "Yes," she said quietly, "I will." And these, as Julian returned to his friends' muffled laughter and congratulatory slaps, he missed the way Amelia's hand drifted to her throat, as though touching a memory. He missed how she watched him walk away, not with hope or excitement, but with the solemn expression of someone finally confronting a ghost. Amelia's apartment was small but orderly, located in a forgotten corner of Las Vegas where the neon didn't reach. After her shift ended at 2 a.m., she sat cross-legged on her worn carpet, a cardboard box open before her. Her hands trembled slightly as she sorted through the contents, all that remained of her mother, Maggie Grace. Beneath old photos and faded birthday cards, her fingers brushed against fabric. She withdrew a small, hand-stitched bracelet, its once vibrant threads now faded. In careful, loving embroidery was a name. Julian. Amelia closed her eyes, remembering her mother's voice from years ago. "She came to the shelter soaked to the bone," Maggie had said, folding laundry in their tiny Louisiana home. 8 months pregnant and nowhere to go. Her family had money, old money, but they disowned her when she got pregnant, said she'd disgraced them. "What was her name?" teenage Amelia had asked. "Elaine Rhodes," Maggie answered. She was the kindest soul I'd ever met. Always making little things for her baby. Booties, blankets, this bracelet. She'd whisper to her belly, "Julian, my sweet Julian." What happened to her? Maggie's eyes had grown distant. She left one night, said she was going to make things right with her family, never came back. Years later, I heard she'd died, never reconciled with them. Before she left, she gave me this bracelet and made me promise something strange. If you ever meet my son, give him this. Tell him I never stopped loving him. Now, 15 years later, Amelia stared at the bracelet, turning it over in her hands. Julian Rhodes, the arrogant man from the diner with cold eyes and a crueler smile. Could he be the same baby her mother had spoken about? She pulled out her phone, searched his name. Images flooded her screen. Julian Rhodes, hotel magnate, playboy, heir to the Rhodes fortune. His eyes, though narrowed in smug satisfaction for the cameras, had the same shape as the woman in her mother's old photograph. "It's him," she whispered. Amelia paced her small apartment, the bracelet clutched in her palm. This man had proposed to her as some kind of joke. She wasn't naive enough to believe otherwise. The contempt in his friend's eyes had been clear. But now she understood why she'd said yes, despite her instincts screaming against it. She sat at her small table and carefully wrapped the bracelet in a handkerchief, then sewed it closed with tiny, precise stitches, just as her mother had taught her. Not for him, she thought, for Elaine, and for the promise my mother kept all these years. As dawn broke over the desert city, Amelia finally slept, the small package tucked beneath her pillow. In her dreams, she heard her mother's voice again. "Some promises must be kept in silence, Amelia. They're the ones that matter most." The little white chapel blazed with tacky neon against the afternoon sky. Julian had chosen it deliberately, the gaudier, the better for their video. Inside, plastic flowers and faux gold cherubs adorned every surface. His friends lounged in the back row, phones raised, barely containing their snickers. Julian straightened his Armani tie, a $5,000 accessory to what he considered the ultimate prank. The Elvis impersonator officiating checked his watch impatiently. "Where's the lucky lady?" Marcus whispered. "Bet she's getting dolled up to snag you permanently." Julian smirked. "The contract's clear. Quick ceremony, quick annulment, and she gets 50 grand. Not enough to change her life, just enough to feel the sting when it's gone." The chapel door opened, and conversation ceased. Amelia entered wearing a simple white dress, probably rented. No veil, no makeup, hair pulled back in a simple knot. But something in her posture made Julian straighten instinctively. She carried herself with unexpected dignity, eyes clear and steady, meeting his gaze without flinching. She walked alone down the short aisle. No music played except the ambient hum of the air conditioner and the occasional muffled snort from Julian's friends. "Dearly beloved," began the Elvis impersonator, his deep voice incongruous with the tacky setting. Throughout the ceremony, Julian maintained his smirk, occasionally glancing back to ensure his friends were recording. Amelia remained composed, her expression unreadable. When asked if she took this man to be her husband, she simply nodded, her voice a quiet, "I do." When it was time for the exchange of rings, Julian pulled out an obviously fake diamond ring from a cereal box prize. "Wait," Amelia said, her voice soft but firm. It was the first time she'd spoken beyond the required responses. "I have something for you first." From her small purse, she withdrew a carefully wrapped handkerchief, hand-stitched closed. Julian's brow furrowed in confusion as she passed it to him. "Open it," she said quietly. Rolling his eyes for his friend's benefit, Julian tore open the stitching, expecting some cheap trinket. The small bracelet fell into his palm, its faded threads catching the garish chapel lights. His smirk froze, then dissolved. His face drained of color as he stared at the hand-embroidered name, his name, in stitches he somehow recognized without knowing how. "What?" he began, his voice suddenly hoarse. "Your mother made that," Amelia said, her voice steady but gentle. She stayed with my mother at a shelter in Louisiana when she was pregnant with you. Before she left, she made my mother promise to give it to you if they ever met." Julian's hands began to shake. The chapel spun around him. A flash of memory, soft hands fixing this bracelet around his tiny wrist, a woman's voice singing softly. "How did you—" His voice broke. The chapel had gone completely silent. Even his friends had lowered their phones, picking up on the sudden shift in energy. Amelia's eyes held no triumph, only a quiet compassion that felt worse than any accusation. "I recognized your name last night. I didn't believe it until I looked you up." Julian looked back down at the bracelet, turning it over in trembling fingers. Something inside him, something buried deep beneath years of resentment and privilege, cracked open. "Do you still want to get married?" the Elvis impersonator asked uncertainly. Amelia took a small step backward. "No," she said gently. "I think we're done here." More. As she turned to leave, Julian found himself on his knees, clutching the bracelet to his chest, unaware of the cameras still recording his collapse, capturing the moment the man who had everything was broken by a simple bracelet and the ghost of a mother he'd spent his life trying to forget. The bracelet seemed to burn in Julian's palm as memories surfaced like drowning victims, gasping, violent, unwelcome. He was 5 years old, his mother fixing this very bracelet around his wrist, whispering, "My sweet Julian." Then his grandfather's stern voice, "The boy stays with us, Elaine. You've disgraced this family enough." The chapel spun around him. Someone's phone flashed. Someone else laughed nervously. "Dude, what the hell?" Marcus approached but stopped when Julian looked up, his expression unrecognizable. Julian struggled to his feet, bracelet clutched in his fist. "How did she die?" he asked Amelia, his voice a ragged whisper. Amelia's eyes softened with something worse than pity. "Cancer. 8 years ago. She never had much, but she spoke of you often." A memory hit him. Age 12, being told his mother had abandoned him, chosen drugs and men over her own son. His grandfather's voice, "She was weak, boy. We Rhodesmen aren't weak." "She never abandoned you," Amelia continued quietly. "Your grandparents took you when she was at her lowest. She tried to get you back for years, but she had nothing, and they had everything, including the best lawyers in Louisiana." Julian's friends shifted uncomfortably. The Elvis impersonator discreetly backed away. "You're lying," Julian said, but his voice held no conviction. "My mother kept a letter from her to you," Amelia replied. "Would you like to see it?" One of Julian's friends attempted a laugh. "Come on, man. This is obviously a scam. She probably looked you up online." "Shut up!" Julian snapped with such venom that the man physically recoiled. In the silence that followed, Julian stared at the bracelet, running his thumb over the careful stitches. He remembered now. His mother's hands were always moving, always creating small, beautiful things. The memory felt like a blade between his ribs. "I need—" Julian started, then stopped, unsure what he needed. Air? Time? Forgiveness? Marcus stepped forward, placing a hand on Julian's shoulder. "Let's get out of here, man. This went too far." Julian shrugged the hand off violently. "Did you know?" he demanded of Marcus. "Did any of you know about my mother when you suggested this sick joke?" The bewilderment in his friend's eyes answered him. This was just another cruel game to them, but chance, or something more, had turned it into his reckoning. "The ceremony isn't complete," the Elvis impersonator noted awkwardly. "You're not legally married." "Good," Amelia said softly. She turned to leave but hesitated at the door. "I never expected anything from this, Julian. I just kept a promise." As she walked out, Julian found himself moving, stumbling after her into the harsh Vegas sunlight. His friends called after him, but their voices seemed to come from another world entirely. "Wait," he called to Amelia's retreating figure. "Please." She stopped, but didn't turn around. "Tell me everything," he said. "Please, I need to know who she really was." Amelia finally turned, her face solemn in the unforgiving desert light. "She was the woman who embroidered your name with love, while the world told her she was nothing. She was the woman who kept your baby picture until it wore thin at the creases. She was your mother, Julian, and she never, ever stopped loving you." Julian felt something inside him collapse completely as the truth, so different from the story he'd built his life around, finally broke through decades of carefully constructed walls. By midnight, the video had gone viral. Millionaire meltdown. Rhodes. Air collapses at Vegas wedding prank. Julian watched the view count climb from his hotel suite, the bracelet still clutched in his hand. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. His grandfather's lawyers, PR teams, business associates. Headlines scrolled across his laptop screen: Rhodes hotels, stock drops following heir's tasteless stunt, and privilege gone wild. Julian Rhodes' wedding prank backfires. Julian turned everything off, sat in the dark, and drank straight from a whiskey bottle. What did they know, these people judging him? What did he know? His entire life had been built on a foundation of lies. His mother hadn't abandoned him. She had been kept from him. Every bitter thought he'd harbored about her, every time he'd told himself he was better off without her weakness, had been poison fed to him by his grandfather. He pulled out his phone and searched her name. Elaine Rhodes. Very little came up. A few ancient society pages from when she was a debutante, then nothing. It was as if she'd disappeared. No, he realized with a sick feeling. She had been erased. A knock at the door. Marcus stood there, looking uncomfortable. "Your grandfather called me," he said. "PR team's in damage control. They want to spin it as—" Julian closed the door in his face. He returned to the window, staring out at the pulsing lights of Vegas. Somewhere out there, Amelia Grace was continuing her life, having delivered a truth that had shattered his. Hours later, dawn breaking over the desert, Julian made a decision. He packed a small bag, left his credit cards on the desk, and took only his wallet, phone, and the bracelet. The taxi driver raised an eyebrow at the address he gave, a small apartment complex far from the strip. "You sure, man? Not exactly tourist territory." Julian nodded. "I'm sure." Amelia's face registered no surprise when she opened her door, as if she'd been expecting him. She wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, ready for her shift. "I need to know everything," Julian said without preamble. "I need to see where she lived, where she died." Amelia studied him, noting his rumpled clothes, the dark circles under his eyes, and the desperation etched into every line of his face. "I have work," she said finally. "I'll pay whatever you'd earn, double, triple." She shook her head. "It's not about money, Julian." "Then what? What do you want from me?" "Nothing," she replied simply. "That's what you don't understand. Not everyone wants something from you." She grabbed her purse and keys, then paused. "I have 3 days off starting tomorrow. If you're serious, meet me here at 6 a.m. We'll drive to Louisiana. I'll show you everything I know about your mother." "Why would you help me?" he asked, genuinely confused. Amelia's eyes, tired but kind, met his. "Because your mother was good to mine when nobody else was. And because everyone deserves to know the truth about where they come from." She stepped past him. "Even spoiled millionaires who think poor people will do anything for money." Eee. As she walked away, Julian felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine shame. Not the embarrassment of public scrutiny, but the deep, searing shame of recognizing his own moral failure. For the first time in his adult life, Julian Rhodes wondered if he was, at his core, a good person. The answer terrified him. The Louisiana bayou spread out before them, misty and ancient. Julian had insisted on renting a car, but Amelia had refused, saying her old Ford would get them where they needed to go. Now, 3 hours into their journey from New Orleans, Julian understood why, as they navigated narrow roads that barely qualified as paved. "This is where you grew up?" he asked, watching cypress trees draped with Spanish moss glide past. "Until I was 17, Amelia nodded. "Then Mom got sick. We moved to Vegas for better medical care. She'd saved just enough for that." "And my mother, was she from here?" Amelia shook her head. "New Orleans originally, old money family, the Rhodes shipping fortune." Julian nodded. His grandfather had converted that fortune into hotels decades ago, but the family's roots in Louisiana ran deep. They pulled up to a modest white building with a weathered sign, St. Margaret's Women's Shelter. "It's still operating?" Julian asked. "Your mother made sure of that," Amelia said quietly, leading him inside. The interior was simple but bright, with children's drawings decorating the walls. An older black woman looked up from the reception desk, her face breaking into a smile when she saw Amelia. "Child, is that you? Lord have mercy. Look how you've grown." "Miss Josephine," Amelia embraced her. "This is Julian Rhodes." The woman's eyes widened. "Elaine's boy. My stars." She came around the desk, studying his face. "You have her eyes. Exactly her eyes." Julian swallowed hard. "You knew my mother?" "Knew her. Honey, she volunteered here for 15 years. Whenever she had $1 to spare, it came here." Julian felt dizzy. But she was poor. In money, yes. In spirit. Richest woman I ever met. Miss Josephine led them down a hallway. "After your grandfather took you, she spiraled for a while. Then one day, she walked back in here and said, 'I can't get my son back, but I can help other mothers keep their children.'" They entered a small room that had been converted to a library. A plaque on the wall read, "The Elaine Rhodes Memorial Library." She taught women to read, helped them get GEDs, find jobs, Miss Josephine explained. Most of these books she collected herself. Julian moved to a glass display case. Inside was a collection of small handmade items, embroidery hoops, hand-stitched baby clothes, tiny bracelets similar to his own. She taught crafting classes, Amelia explained. "Said working with your hands helped heal the heart." Miss Josephine opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a small box. "She left this for you. Said if you ever came looking, we should give it to you." Julian opened it with trembling hands. Inside lay a faded photograph of a young woman holding a baby, a blue ribbon wrapped around a lock of baby hair, and an envelope addressed simply, "Julian." "I'll leave you," Miss Josephine said, patting his shoulder. "Take all the time you need." When they were alone, Julian stared at the items, unable to touch them. "She knew I'd come here someday?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "She hoped," Amelia corrected gently. "Even when she was dying, she believed someday you'd want to know the truth." Julian finally picked up the envelope, turning it over in his hands. "I'm not sure I can read this." "You don't have to do it now," Amelia said, "or ever." Julian looked around the small library at the evidence of a life lived in service to others. A life he'd been told was worthless, a mother he'd been taught to despise. "I never looked for her," he confessed, shame burning his throat. "Not once. I believed every horrible thing they said about her." "You were a child," Amelia replied. "Children believe what they're told." "And after? What's my excuse then?" His voice broke. "I had resources. I could have found her at any time." Amelia was quiet for a moment. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves are more comfortable than the truth we fear. Julian carefully opened the envelope, unfolding the letter inside. As he read, tears began to stream down his face. For the mother who had loved him from afar, for the years lost to his pride and ignorance, and for the man he might have been if he'd known the truth. 6 months later, The Vegas sun blazed overhead as Amelia stepped out of the community center where she now worked. The school's lunch program needed extra hands during summer break, and she enjoyed the work more than the diner, especially since someone had anonymously funded a complete renovation of the kitchen facilities. She smiled, knowing exactly who that anonymous donor was. Julian had disappeared from public view after their Louisiana trip. The tabloids had briefly speculated about a breakdown or rehab stint, but eventually moved on to fresher scandals. Only Amelia knew where he'd gone and what he was doing. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "Library dedication ceremony tomorrow. Will you come?" She responded with a simple yes. Back in her apartment, Amelia opened the small box where she kept her mother's few precious belongings. Among them now was a check Julian had tried to give her when they returned from Louisiana, a check she had firmly refused. "I didn't do this for money," she had told him. "Then why?" he had asked, genuinely confused. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because your mother would have wanted you to know who she really was." Julian had stared at her with new eyes then, not as someone to be pitied or used, but as someone to be respected. The next day, Amelia drove to St. Margaret's Women's Shelter in Henderson, Nevada, a new branch that had opened last month. The parking lot was filled with community members and media, all gathered around a podium where Julian Rhodes stood, looking different than the man she'd met 6 months ago. Gone was the designer suit, replaced by a simple button-down shirt and slacks. His hair was shorter, his face leaner, his eyes clearer. But the most striking change was in his demeanor. The arrogant mask had been replaced by something authentic and vulnerable. "My mother believed everyone deserves a second chance," Julian was saying to the crowd. "For too long, I dishonored her memory by living as if money and status were what defined a person's worth. I know better now." He unveiled the plaque. The Elaine Rhodes Memorial Center for Women and Children. Afterward, Julian navigated through congratulatory handshakes until he reached Amelia. "You came," he said simply. "I said I would. Have you seen the library section yet?" She shook her head, and he led her through the building to a bright room filled with books and comfortable reading nooks. "There's something I want to show you," he said, stopping before a smaller plaque beside the entrance. Amelia read, "The Maggie Grace Learning Center, where promises are kept and new beginnings are born." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes. "Julian, you didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted gently. "Your mother kept a promise that changed my life. This seemed fitting." They stood in silence, surrounded by the physical manifestation of two mothers' legacies. "I've been offered a teaching position," Amelia said finally. "The community college, basic literacy for adult learners." Julian smiled. "You'll be excellent at that. What about you? Are you going back to your old life?" His expression grew serious. "No, I'm selling my shares in Rhodes Hotels, starting something new." "Your grandfather must love that," she said with a wry smile. "He's made his feelings quite clear," Julian replied, a hint of his old dry humor returning. "But for the first time, I'm making decisions based on what I believe is right, not what's expected of me." As they walked through the center, Julian looked at Amelia with newfound respect. This woman who had struggled all her life had shown more integrity and strength than anyone in his privileged circle. She had changed everything, not by seeking validation or wealth, but by simply keeping a promise. "Thank you," he said suddenly, his voice low and sincere. "Not just for finding me, but for making me see what I'd become." Amelia smiled, the late afternoon sun catching in her eyes. "Sometimes we all need someone to show us what we're unable to see ourselves." 1 year after the viral wedding video, Julian walked through the community school courtyard, a simple envelope in his hand. Children raced past him, laughing under the autumn sun, while teachers called them back to order. The school kitchen door stood propped open, releasing the scent of today's lunch. Julian paused, watching Amelia through the doorway. She moved with purpose, directing volunteers, her hands constantly in motion. She had been promoted to kitchen director months ago, but still worked alongside everyone else, sleeves rolled up. Julian approached quietly, waiting until she noticed him. "Julian," she smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "I didn't know you were back in town." "Just got in this morning," he replied. "I was in Louisiana, finalizing the shelter expansions." They stepped outside into the quiet courtyard. The past year had changed them both. Amelia stood straighter, with the confidence of someone who had found her calling. Julian's designer clothes had given way to practical workwear, his manicured appearance replaced by calluses and sun-browned skin. "I found something," he said, handing her the envelope. "At the original shelter, it was hidden behind a bookshelf we were moving." Amelia opened it carefully. Inside was a blue ribbon, similar to the one from Julian's mother's keepsake box, and a faded photograph of two young women sitting on a porch swing. Elaine Rhodes and Maggie Grace, arms linked, laughing. "I've never seen this," Amelia whispered, running her finger over her mother's young face. "Turn it over," Julian said quietly. On the back, in faded ink, "Sisters of the Heart, Louisiana, 1990. "They were so young," Amelia murmured. "There was a note with it," Julian continued, pulling out a yellowed piece of paper. "It's addressed to both of us." Amelia looked up in surprise. "Both of us? How is that possible?" "It's dated just before your mother died," Julian explained. "Listen, to my daughter Amelia and to Julian, whom I've never met, but feel I know through his mother's stories. If you're reading this, then somehow the impossible has happened, and you've found each other. Elaine always believed that things that are meant to be find their way, no matter how winding the path. Perhaps she was right. Take care of each other. You're the last links to two women who loved each other as sisters when the world gave them nothing but hardship." Maggie Grace. Tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks. She knew somehow. She must have written this when she was in hospice. "Do you believe that?" Julian asked softly. "That things meant to be find their way?" "I don't know," Amelia admitted. "A year ago I would have said no, but now—" She gestured between them at the strange, unlikely connection they shared. "I've been thinking about staying," Julian said abruptly. "Here in Vegas, the foundation work can be managed from anywhere, and I—" A bell rang, signaling the lunch period. Children began streaming into the courtyard. "I should get back," Amelia said, carefully returning the photo and note to the envelope. "Have dinner with me," Julian blurted out, not as— He hesitated. "Not as anything complicated. Just two people connected by an extraordinary circumstance." Amelia studied him, this man who was so different from the one who had mockingly proposed to her in a diner. "All right," she said finally, "but I choose the place, and we go Dutch." Julian smiled. "I wouldn't dare suggest otherwise." As Amelia returned to the kitchen, Julian remained in the courtyard, watching children play. A year ago, his life had been empty luxury and meaningless pursuits. Now he felt something he'd never experienced before: purpose. Not from grand gestures or philanthropic donations, but from the simple act of honoring a woman he'd never truly known and connecting with the daughter of someone who had loved her. He fingered the small object in his pocket, his mother's bracelet now restored and strengthened. Some connections, he was learning, transcended time and circumstance. Some promises, once made, found their way to completion, no matter how impossible the odds. Winter arrived in Nevada with cool nights and crystalline days. On a bench in the school's new memorial garden, Julian and Amelia sat side by side, watching children plant bulbs that would bloom in spring. Their friendship had developed slowly over shared meals and long conversations, never rushing, never presuming. Two people finding common ground in the legacy of their mothers. "The foundation approved the scholarship program," Julian said, breaking the comfortable silence. 10 full rides for children of single mothers starting next fall." Amelia nodded approvingly. "You're doing good work, Julian." "I'm trying," he replied simply. A gentle breeze stirred the garden, carrying the scent of fresh earth and new plantings. The plaque at the entrance read, "The Grace Rhodes Memorial Garden, where new beginnings take root." "I found another letter," Julian said after a moment. "From my mother. It was in a safety deposit box the lawyers finally tracked down." Amelia turned to him, noting the emotions playing across his face. "What did it say?" "That she forgave them, my grandparents, that she hoped I would too someday." He looked down at his hands. "I'm not sure I can." "Forgiveness isn't a single decision," Amelia said gently. "It's a process, and it's not something anyone can demand of you, not even your mother." Julian nodded, grateful for her understanding. "She also wrote about you." Amelia's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Me? But she never met me." "She wrote about Maggie's little girl," Julian clarified. "She said, 'I hope someday my Julian meets Maggie's Amelia.' They would recognize in each other what the world often misses, that true worth has nothing to do with what you possess." Amelia was silent, absorbing the weight of this connection that had been envisioned decades before they'd met. "Sometimes I wonder," Julian continued hesitantly, "if there was something bigger at work. The odds of us meeting the way we did. In a tacky diner during a cruel prank." Amelia finished with a small smile. Julian winced. "Not my finest moment." "But maybe necessary," she suggested. "Would you have believed me if I'd just approached you randomly? 'Excuse me, Mr. Rhodes, but I think our mothers were friends.'" Julian laughed softly. "Probably not." A small girl approached them, holding a paper cup with a tiny planted seed. "For the garden," she said solemnly, handing it to Amelia. "Thank you, Lucia," Amelia smiled. "What did you plant?" "A sunflower," the child replied. "Teacher says they always turn to face the sun." As the girl skipped away, Julian looked thoughtful. "That's what my mother did, isn't it? Even in darkness, she kept turning toward the light." "Both our mothers," Amelia agreed. They fell silent again, watching children plant seeds of future blooms. Without planning or discussion, Julian's hand found Amelia's on the bench between them. Their fingers intertwined naturally, neither looking at the other, both understanding that something profound had shifted between them. It wasn't romantic love, not yet, but something perhaps more fundamental, recognition. Two souls connecting through the legacy of love that had preceded them, finding in each other a truth that had always been waiting to be discovered. "I've been offered a position," Julian said finally, "running a new community development initiative here in Las Vegas." Amelia turned to him, a question in her eyes. "I said yes," he continued. "I'm staying." The implication hung in the air between them. Not a declaration, but a possibility, a door opening to a future neither could have imagined a year ago. Amelia squeezed his hand gently. No words were necessary as the winter sun warmed their faces and children's laughter filled the garden their mothers had somehow, impossibly, planted decades before they'd ever met. Christmas Eve, snow, rare in Vegas, dusted the city in a fine powder. In Julian's modest new home, so different from his former penthouses, a small fire crackled in the fireplace. Julian sat alone, turning his mother's bracelet in his hands. He had worn it daily since Louisiana, a talisman of sorts. Tonight, though, something felt different. The edges seemed worn in a new way, a small section beginning to fray. Carefully, he examined it under the lamp. There, nearly invisible, a tiny separation in the fabric backing. With delicate fingers, he widened the gap, feeling something inside. His breath caught as he extracted a thin, faded thread of blue, woven together with what appeared to be hair, blonde baby hair, and a darker adult strand, braided together in an eternal circle. Beneath them, revealed by their removal, was a tiny embroidery, so small it had remained hidden for years. "Always your son." Julian's knees buckled, and he sank to the floor, cradling the tiny treasure. His mother had woven her love literally into the fabric of his childhood, creating something so intimate that only he would ever find it. A message preserved across decades, waiting for this moment. The doorbell rang. Amelia stood on his porch, holding a small package wrapped in simple paper. "Merry Christmas Eve," she smiled, then noticed his expression. "Julian? What's wrong?" He held up the bracelet, showing her the tiny hidden message and the braided hair. She kept a part of us together all this time." Amelia stepped inside, closing the door against the cold. As Julian explained his discovery, tears welled in her eyes. "Like a promise," she whispered. "Hidden but always there." She handed him the package. "I found this while cleaning out my mother's last storage box. I thought you should have it." Inside was a small leather-bound journal. Julian recognized his mother's handwriting immediately. "The final pages are dated just weeks before she died," Amelia explained. "Read the last entry." With trembling hands, Julian flipped to the final page. December 12th, 2016. "I dreamed last night that Julian found his way to Maggie's daughter. In the dream, they sat together in a garden, and everything I'd lost was restored. Not as it was, but as it was meant to be. Strange how certain dreams don't feel like dreams at all, but like glimpses of what the heart knows to be true. To whoever finds this journal, if by some miracle this reaches my son, know that love is never truly lost. It weaves itself into the fabric of existence, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to look beyond what they think they know. Julian, my sweet boy, I never stopped loving you, not for a single moment, and somehow I believe you'll find your way to the people who know my heart. Forgive yourself, forgive the past, and trust that sometimes the longest journey leads us exactly where we needed to go. Always, your mother." Julian closed the journal, tears flowing freely now. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing Vegas in rare beauty. "She knew," he said, voice breaking. "Somehow she knew this would happen." Amelia sat beside him on the floor, their shoulders touching. Maybe some connections are beyond our understanding. Julian turned to her, seeing in her eyes the same wonder he felt. Here they were, two people who should never have met, brought together by mothers who had believed in something bigger than circumstance. "I used to think I'd lost everything," Julian said softly. "But really, I found it all." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "This isn't what you might think," he said quickly, seeing Amelia's eyes widen. Inside lay two simple rings, each embedded with a tiny blue thread. "They're made from the thread I found in the bracelet," he explained. "I had them fashioned yesterday, one for each of us, not as a proposal, but as a reminder of what brought us together." Amelia took one of the rings, turning it in the firelight. The blue thread caught the glow like a captured piece of sky. "To remember," she said, slipping it on her finger. Julian did the same, and they sat in silence, watching the fire dance and snow fall outside the window. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining as they had in the garden. "I was wrong about so many things," Julian murmured. "About worth, about love, about what matters." "But not anymore," Amelia finished gently. As the clock struck midnight, marking Christmas Day, they remained on the floor, surrounded by the physical manifestations of a love that had survived separation, misunderstanding, and time itself. For the first time in his life, Julian Rhodes understood that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in the invisible embroidery of love that connects us all, stitched quietly, patiently, across the fabric of our lives, waiting to be discovered by those willing to look beneath the surface. In the morning, they would visit the shelter together, bringing gifts for the children. They would plant more flowers in the memorial garden. They would continue building a legacy worthy of their mother's sacrifice. But for now, in this quiet moment, Julian Rhodes and Amelia Grace sat together, united by the unseen threads their mothers had woven years before. A tapestry of love finally revealed, finally complete. Some stories do not end with grand victories, but with quiet revelations that transform lives forever. Julian and Amelia's journey reminds us that true wealth is not measured by what we own, but by the love, promises, and silent sacrifices woven into the fabric of our lives. Sometimes, the most powerful connections are those stitched quietly across time, waiting for hearts brave enough to rediscover them. What about you? What silent promises and unseen bonds are still waiting to be uncovered in your life? And what did you feel after experiencing this story with us today? If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel, turning on the notification bell and leaving a like. We would love to hear from you. Comment below and tell us which country or city you are watching from. It helps us create even better stories for you. Also, don't forget to watch the next recommended story by clicking on the video card that appears on your screen. Thank you so much for being here with us today.